if we need video. So without further ado, I think we could begin. Thank you all for being here for the first time since I think December 10th was the last time we met. So happy holidays.
New Year.
Happy New Year. If we're still doing that. And thanks again as we get into the second half of this process and the second calendar year. Really appreciate all the time and effort everybody here is putting into this. So I've sent out a few things, including our steering committee agenda for this master plan meeting, and I'll pull that up real quick. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I think we need to jump right into things. But what we're looking at today is the economic development report that was sent out, and we received a lot of thoughtful comments on that I've compiled, and we could work through one at a time, and reports on the visioning survey that happened in the fall and the open house that happened at the end of November. And then we'll jump into next steps, including technical review with staff and a shift to smaller groups to examine specific elements and topic areas that will eventually be in the master plan. So without further ado, I think I might have stole some of your thunder, Michael, but if you want to jump in, feel free to.
Yeah, I'm just glad you didn't steal all my thunder. So as Justin said, that's the agenda today. So as you know, we did the economic survey was in the summer and into the fall with the student survey. We finally have a report, and a lot of the themes and trends and opinions that were in that report involve the reflection of the marketplace is very strong in Princeton, and particularly the CBD as a destination, not just for residents, but also for folks who come to Princeton because they love it as a beautiful and cool, unique place. But within the framework of the economic survey, there were also comments related to access and mobility and safety and parking and other things that came up too. And those themes were also reflected in the community survey, which closed right about November. And the survey really exposed a lot of preferences and opinions about the major themes: housing, access, and mobility within Princeton, recreation, open space, and environmental and sustainability, and also some of the things that folks thought were the future direction for Princeton. And then finally, the open house really explored some of the larger themes of housing, mobility, the downtown, and open space and recreation. And it drilled down a little bit more. We got a little bit more specific information on there, but it was very reflective. There were themes that ran through all three of these efforts, that there seems to be some consistency here with respect to development of housing at some level, making sure the central business district is fantastic, and making sure that residents are taken care of in terms of mobility, safety, open space amenities, and other things. Those are the major themes. So without going through each one of these, we're now we have Joe Getz, Mark Lobauer here to talk about the economic survey in terms of answering questions about that. This was distributed. As Justin said, we got a lot of feedback. Some of those comments reflected, acknowledgement of facts that needed to be, sharpened a little bit, and also questions about some of the information that was gathered together. So I think that, to move forward, we can move to the economic report and any questions or concerns there.
Is that a handoff, Michael?
Well, I think Kristen Applegate, raised her hand. So let's
yeah, I was just wondering about process. So many of us, including myself, had shared through email over the past day or so comments. What are we going to, or should I sit here today and go through the comments that I submitted by email, or how are we moving forward to move to a corrected, updated version?
Right. So all the comments were submitted to Joe and Mark, so they're prepared to respond to them now. So as I said, some of them are just factual and not, or maybe stylistic, or not really based on opinion. So Joe and Mark are going to actually address these, and if there is more discussion needed to clarify things, then we're going to have that discussion today. Thanks.
So if what we thought would be helpful, there were a number of responses that said, well, you have a typo here, you have a typo there, which we obviously have gone and corrected and revised in the report. There were some comments that questioned the syntax or the context of what we had written, and where that was easily apparent, we went back and we revised that so that will meet everyone's interest. And then there were questions that probably would warrant a little bit of discussion, and what our hope was now that we can go through those. I think there's about 16 of them. And we had thought that the easiest way to do this was let us go through it. If that answers the question or the comment, fine, we can move on and save that time for other things. If there are still additional questions about it, then certainly we can discuss that further. So I'm going to go first. The way we work at JGSC is my focus is predominantly on numbers and surveys and data, and Mark's is predominantly on interviewing stakeholders and people like that, and observations about physical structures and things. So I'll go first. Mark will follow up with his group of questions. One of the ones that came up, I guess yesterday or the day before, was about the absence of Latino information. And what we want to remind everybody was early on in the survey, before we even did the survey, we said that race is not a big factor in economic behaviors. In terms of measuring what is happening in the community, race doesn't really have a big role to play in that. So we don't typically include any questions in our surveys about race for those reasons. In this case, a member of the steering committee, and I apologize that I can't remember which one it was or who of you it was, raised the question that you wanted to be sure that you could reach an adequate number of people within the Asian population. So we agreed for that purpose alone that we would add a question about race, because that would allow us to track it through the survey process and see if we were getting a representative sampling. And in that specific case, as we started to go through the survey, we were not getting a representative response from the Asian community. And we reached out to Elaine Clisham, and she coordinated with Justin to make sure that additional steps were taken so that we could get an adequate representation. But that's the only reason why we even address race in these kinds of reports. So the concern about that we didn't delve into the Hispanic population, that's deliberate. It's not something that we have found to be useful in the type of report that we're doing. This isn't a demographic analysis, it's an economic analysis. And as we said before, it really doesn't, we don't see a lot of differences from one race to another in terms of how consumers behave in stores and things like that.
Joe.
Yes.
Joe, can I ask a question? That was actually my staff flag that, and I think it was really just about this chart on page 16, if you could see.
Yeah.
This is white, black, Asian, some other race, 2 or more races. I know on some of the census data, older in particular, Hispanic and Latino is asked as a separate question. I think in 2020 that changed. Is that just why this isn't on here? Because this isn't the self-identifying.
Yeah, that what you're looking at there, Justin, is just baseline information from the 2020 census. We didn't delve into it. We were just trying to provide it so that if someone had, wanted to know for informational sake, you could look at that information. But again, we don't delve into it because in terms of actual consumer behavior or measuring spending patterns or historical data, race really doesn't play a factor in it. It's one of those questions that if you measure it and you get the information, there really isn't anything you can do with it for this type of a report anyway.
Okay, I hear you on that. We might need to work after to see if we want to add in Hispanic and Latino, if it's a separate question, with that all being said, or if it's alongside the same census data. I think this chart adds up to 100%, so it might not be. But then we'll just add in the second part of people identifying as Hispanic and Latino.
Well, yeah, and you know, because you and I have had this conversation, I think through email, but we've had the conversation about the Census Bureau, whether it's the American Community Survey or whether it's the census data from 2020. A lot of times they actually present multiple charts. So they'll present population by race, which is what we're showing here. Sometimes there is population age 18 and older by race. Sometimes there is Hispanic population. We were just trying to provide the basics sort of as a baseline. As I said, it's not particularly relevant to the type of economic analysis we were doing, but happy to discuss it with you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The next one, and these are not in any particular order. I probably picked them, you know, first if I thought I knew the answer already. Was consumer spending at Princeton North Shopping Center. And there were really two questions about this. One was, how did you arrive at the math? We came back and said in the report, consumers who go to Princeton Shopping Center spend about, if you're a resident, you spend about $6,100 a year there. And if you're a non-resident, I think it was like $2,800 or something. So first there was a question of how did you arrive at the math? And then secondly, there was a question about whether or not the question itself was confusing. So the math, there you go. It's right here at the top. If you look at Princeton North Center, all responses, average visits per month. What we did was we take the average visits per month, we multiply that times the average spending per visit, and we multiply that times 12 months. That's the math, plain and simple. So if you take an average resident now, not a non-resident, an average resident spends $60.75 based on what they told us. They visit the center 8.4 times a month, multiply those two times 12, you come out with 6,123 or something like that. That's how the math works. The secondary question was raised about whether or not the survey question was confusing. And I just don't agree with it. We've used that identical question in dozens and dozens of these over, I have no idea, forever. We've been using it. We've never had anyone feel that the question itself was confusing. I went back and actually looked on the survey. Here's what the question says. Spending per visit, on average, about how much money do you spend at all stores, excluding grocery and eating places, per visit to the Princeton Shopping Center? It may be me, maybe I've looked at this for so many years that I don't see something, but to me, it sounded very clear. Thousands of people responded to this question in this particular survey. So I don't know how to answer that beyond that.
Okay, and I saw Jen's hand was up first, and I think as a business owner in the shopping center, I'd love to hear what she has to say. And then I saw Louise's hand was up as well.
Yeah, this is just a very nitpicky thing, maybe, but not really. I used to rent at the Princeton North Shopping Center, which is in Montgomery. The Princeton Shopping Center should be what this is called in the report.
Okay.
Okay, so that
Okay.
It's a little detail, but it.
Nope, it matters.
Okay,
We will make that change, Jen.
thanks.
Exactly the point that I was planning to make.
You always
Thank-
want to pile on, Louise. I'm teasing. I'm teasing. It is a valid point. We will make that change, make that correction.
Yeah,
Okay. Next, there was some debate back and forth and about the topic here is called new housing. When we began our work early in the process, we were given information that said you're going to have at least 600 new housing units over the next few years. Later, and I think the actual remark was because the developers keep showing up or the plans keep coming in or whatever it was, there was a recommendation that that number be increased from 600 new housing units to 1,000 new housing units. And we made that change, but I'm not sure that we actually went back and corrected all of the context that surrounded it. Here's what actually happens with housing units. When you build 1,000 new housing units, you create on average 899 new households. And that creates a number of population. So there was some question about what population number do you use per household and why. We wanted to stay true to the census data. The census data says on average, as of 2020, on average, a household in Princeton has 2.55 people. And I know that there's some debate about whether other sources say that number's higher or lower, but I think that if we start mixing sources more than necessary, we're just going to end up confusing ourselves. So we're really trying to just keep it focused on what the Census Bureau is telling us. And then a number came back and said, well, I don't remember what we said initially. We said it would be a 10% increase in population, which isn't true. There's an increase in population, there's an increase in housing units, and there's an increase in households. And that's important because housing units do not spend money. And population isn't a good way to measure economic spending, because when you say in a household, it could be mom and dad, it could be great grandpa and a mom and a 4-year-old. So what they tend to do is they tend to use household spending as a common denominator. We took the number for housing units. Currently, according to census, you're at 10,450. If we add another 1,000, you're going to go to 11,450. That is a net increase of 10.5%. And what's important is the difference between gross increase and net increase. So if we're at 85 and we add 15 and we get to 100, the net increase is 17.65%. The gross increase is 15%. 15 new houses out of 100 is 15%. But 15 new houses out of 85 is 17.65%. So we just wanted to try and clarify this. We went all back through the math, double checked, triple checked our numbers. Here's what we found. Based on 1,000 new housing units, physical structures, the number of existing housing units will increase 10.5% to 11,450. In terms of population, the number for the population is going to be 2,550 additional residents. And I'm trying to change the screen here for a second. I apologize. So the population is going to increase net 12%. There was some debate back and forth about whether that should be 8.3 or 8%. That's a gross increase. So when you get to all of this new population, 8.3% of it will come from those new houses. But given the population you're dealing with today, if you get 1,000 new housing units, and if there are 2.55 people per household, you're going to have a 12% increase. We will make that change in the report. We will add that explanation that it is a gross increase versus a net increase. And hopefully, I don't know if other people have questions on that one or not. Really? Okay, good.
I was just asking if you meant to be sharing something. You said you were switching screens, but nothing's showing up for us.
I'm changing my internal screen.
Got it. Okay.
Next, there was a comment about retail categories. And the comment, here's how it read. Retail categories in Princeton today are dominated by eating and drinking places. And the question was whether or not dominated was the appropriate adjective to use there. And to be honest, I don't care. I'll make it whatever everybody else feels comfortable with. But here's what we were referring to. We were not referring to retail versus services. And there's a very key distinction in that. Traditional retail is apparel stores, it's bicycle shops, it's eating and drinking places, it's grocery stores. That's traditional retail. Traditional services is doctors, lawyers, engineers, a lot of categories, educational facilities, libraries, all of that gets lumped into the category of services. And it even includes things like, I think it includes beauticians. I know it includes car washes. So it starts to get into this really gray area. So although we didn't underline it or make a note on it, and maybe we could have been more descriptive, the fact is that we are talking about retail, and we are only talking about retail in Princeton. There was a question about, well, how does this compare to the state or whatever? And that's not the point we were trying to make. The point we were trying to make was when you look at your retail universe in Princeton, it is dominated by eating and drinking places. And frankly, we're not saying that's good, bad, or indifferent. We're saying it is what it is. That's at what, 6.1%. The next closest category within retail in Princeton was at 2%. Again, I'm not married to the word dominant. If anyone wants to suggest a softer word or a phrase that you want us to insert in there that makes this more clear, happy to do it.
And I see Jen's hand up again.
Yeah, I was going to say, perhaps we could add the phrasing of, compared to whatever percent for the state. I know that was helpful for me to read it in the email.
Okay, the only thing that might be confusing there, again, remember, Jen, the intent of the paragraph was to say, if you look at the retail pie in Princeton, here's how it breaks out. If we start to add comparisons to other areas, I don't want it to change the context or the intent of that paragraph, but let me look at it and I'll see if maybe we need to add another paragraph below it that makes that comparison. Eating and drinking, and I think it was Sam who brought this point out, eating and drinking is a smaller percentage of businesses in Princeton than it is statewide. But again, we're talking about really large pools of businesses and almost none of the characteristics. There's no apple-to-apple comparisons to be made in that kind of an environment. Shopping centers boost it, highway, convenience, food service boost those numbers up wildly. And that's just not the physical environment that we're dealing with here. But absolutely, the point is well made. Sam's point is well made. We'll be happy to go back and look at how we compare that to the state. And again, unless someone wants to suggest something, we'll think of a different word there to replace dominant.
I have to say, I agree with Jen. I think that without the contextual language, it does actually give an impression. There's a characterization there, an impression that maybe is not exactly what you want. I think that that framing language, even though it is not exactly apples to apples for our purposes and for the people who are going to be reading this, I do think is helpful.
Okay, we'll be happy to make that.
Yes, Mayor.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I think we should just drop the word dominant. Because I think it's misused. It's not, that segment is not dominant.
Okay.
6% is not dominant. I just think it makes it easier for everybody.
That's fine. I always talk over people, so I'm trying to look for hands here. Another question, another comment we received was, this is very similar in nature, and I will take blame for that being my writing style. This has to do with population by race. There was a question about the statement that said, quote, compared to both the trade area and the state, Princeton is overwhelmingly white. Now that sentence got put in there because originally we were using data from the community survey, which is, and I think, again, this goes to the point that Jason and I had discussed, the American Community Survey data is wildly different from the 2020 census data. So again, we switched back to the census data, and when we changed the numbers, we didn't change the context of the sentence. The simple fixes, this is the same thing as what we were talking about with retail categories. It's looking at the Princeton universe and trying to describe what does your customer look like, or what does your resident look like, as opposed to how does that compare to the state. I should not have used the phrase compared to the state. I can change the sentence and change the context by simply saying Princeton is predominantly white. 6 out of 10 people in Princeton are white. I don't think it makes I don't think it makes any statement. I think it's just a fact, a statement of fact, unless somebody else has a suggestion on it. Yes, no? All right. There was also a question about population growth, and I know some people spent some time on this. Again, I excluded the word annual, which probably would have avoided a lot of questions and a lot of calculus. I see David shaking. Sorry. I just wanted to test your math and see how good you are at this. Seriously, there's a question about population growth. We have added the phrase annual rate. And again, we went from American Community Survey back to census data. According to the 2020 census, the annual population growth rate from 2010 to 2020 was 0.71, not 0.75. And I think in the emails back and forth, somebody actually came out and said, yeah, it should be 0.71. And whoever said that, you were absolutely right. There's a comment that that the Princeton survey was delayed, and we're just going to remove the comment. It's not relevant. It doesn't add or subtract anything from the report. There was a comment about the number of college students, and I think the question specifically was, well, there were two questions. One was, is the number of college students, why is it identical in both Princeton and the trade area? And then the second question was, can we tell if those students are graduates or undergraduates? The data that we're referring to comes from the US Census Data 2020. It's all the way at the end of the 2-page report. What it tells you is what they refer to as group quarters. And group quarters are places like prisons. There are places like colleges with on-campus housing. There are places like extended care facilities. There's actually, this year for the first time, they've broken it out into about 6 different categories, which is very helpful because we just used to see a number was 10 grand. We didn't know whether that meant they were all college students or all prisoners or somewhere in between. So the number comes directly from the report. We went back and double checked, and they are saying, the US Census is saying that the number of students living in group quarter housing is identical in both the trade area and in Princeton itself. And the only thing I can judge from that is that there's probably not another big live-in campus on here. I see a question, Kristen.
Hi, Joe. So I had raised that question. Number one, the population seemed interesting to me, given that it was actually lower than the number of graduate and undergraduate student total that we have on affiliated with Princeton. Not everyone lives here,
Right,
but
right.
Not even taking into account the fact that there's a seminary here in town also. So I think what you're identifying there is because, and I worked on the census data for the university, so I'm very familiar with your term group quarters. So I'm just not sure whether you should be putting a footnote to that number in some way, identifying that it's based off of group quarters, because
Yeah.
the college student population here is a big part of the town. That number might not quite capture it. It basically captures the students who live in dorms at Princeton University, and I'm not sure how they characterize them at the seminary. So it just
Yes.
might be worth putting an asterisk.
No, you're exactly right. It captures group quarters, which they define as people living in, I think it's defined as on-campus dorms. I'm sure we could root through and find their definition of it. But footnoting it and explaining it is the easiest way to add context to this, because
I would suggest you do that, Joe, just because of the nature of the data and that population in town.
that's fine. The other question was, does it specify whether the students are graduate or undergraduate? It does not.
Your answer about group quarters answered my question about graduate students. I was trying to figure it out by reading it.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I see Tim's had his hand up for a while, and then Councilman Cohen.
Yeah, thanks. Joe, I want to go back to the predominantly white comment,
No.
and I think it's a semantical question because dominant is in predominantly, and given the history of race relations everywhere, I think probably just saying majority white instead of anything, and it goes back to the whole dominated by using that Sam brought up where dining was concerned. It's just a word that's kind of semi-loaded.
That's fine.
So thank you.
Happy to do that. Okay.
Appreciate it.
Councilman Cohen.
Yeah, so I can't remember from the map whether Rider University is in or out of the
Great area.
the market area. Yeah, because certainly there are some on-campus students there. I don't know, it's clear if you are getting your information from the census, you don't want to be tinkering with that, but it's the one puzzlement to me about why the number in the trade area is the same as in Princeton proper.
So here's what I can do. First off, I think we ought to be real men and tinker with census data, don't you? Seriously, here's what we can do. The trade area is defined as a 5-mile radius around the municipality's hall, the municipal hall. So I can pull that map up, I can locate Rider, and I can find out the answer to your
Rider's outside.
It
Speaking
is
as a
outside.
Rider grad,
I was going to say, thank goodness, because the problem becomes then we're back to, we don't agree with the Census Bureau. But what Mark says it's outside, I'll be happy to double check it for you.
and
Look on the
speaking
map.
as a Rider grad, I can confidently say it's outside of the 5-mile radius. I used to spend all my weekends in Princeton when I was attending Rider, so I knew how long of a drive it was.
Okay.
The last one I have on my side, and I'll turn it over to Mark. There was a question about respondents to student survey by gender, and a couple people picked it up. We did a copy and paste, and then we did not change the gender of the respondent. This is from the college student. It'll be correct in the final report, but the answer was it's 57% female. 41% male and 2% non-binary. So thank you for catching that, and we'll make that correction. That's all I have.
Okay.
Mark, is there anything you want to say? I have
Yes.
some other questions too. I could wait, or we could do.
Why don't you go ahead, John? I mean, I have a set of questions that we have responses to that I can follow through on, or saying you questions now that don't have anything to do with what Joe just went through.
I'm sorry, you broke up a little there. The responses I have are just other ones that have been emailed to me from the steering committee in the past day. So I'm not sure if you've had a chance to review them. But one of them was about the chart on page 21, or actually a few of them, and the reasons that people visit Princeton. And it's obviously more than just live here, work here, or visit people at the university. I guess the larger question in the survey, were those the only three options? I don't recall, or were there more? Okay, if there were more, can we put all of them in that chart then, so we could compare, what people put?
I'm sitting here like an idiot, Justin, saying, no, there were more. I think there were more. I think there were 4 or 5, and we can.
I think so too.
Happy to add them.
Okay. And anywhere else where, that is also the case, let's make sure we add them in too.
Okay.
There were some questions about walking to places, and some of the assertions made. Bun Drive, for example, it says can only be reached by car. Areas not walkable. But
I'm
there
going to
are.
Yes, and State Road as well, and I'm going to be addressing those questions.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll let you go through yours then.
All right, thank you. And before I begin with those responses, I want to, before I forget, say this. I wanted to thank you all for the thoughtful read that you gave to our report, and the care that you gave in giving us those very thorough responses. I mean, we can all benefit by editing. I'm certainly no exception to that rule, so I'm grateful for the work that you've all done to help us make it a better report. I also wanted to thank those of you who did participate as stakeholders and interviewed with me for the purpose of putting this report together. Just say thanks for doing that. I know that was a bit of work for you all too. All right, so the questions I had, the one that you just mentioned, Justin, was the first one I had to respond to. The question that talked about how we had said that that's not the first question. All right, let me skip that one. The first question I have on here talks about the wide sidewalks. We had mentioned how the sidewalks in the central business district are very wide, and may have used the word throughout. And if I used the word throughout, that was inartful, because as the commenter pointed out, not every sidewalk in the central business district is wide. And they offered several examples: Hullfish, Bank Street, Chambers Street, South Tulane. And that's very true. And we'll be happy to clarify in the report that we didn't, if we sounded as though it was every sidewalk, we certainly did not mean that. The point I was trying to make in that paragraph was that central business district has been designed to be very accommodating to pedestrians and to people on bicycles, and it's been successful at doing that. Yes, it's true, Nassau Street is the widest. It's 20 feet wide, even wider in some places. Witherspoon Street is also very wide, 10 feet wide at least, along the sidewalks along the length of Witherspoon. These are the arterial sidewalks that people use when they're in the central business district. And because they are that wide, they can accommodate a high flow of people, which encourages people to want to move from store to store, encourages the shop owners to activate the sidewalks by setting out sidewalk dining, maybe putting some merchandise out on the sidewalk to stimulate even more shopping, more. All of that is to say it's a different type of commerce than what you find in the other areas. So yes, I will correct the language so it's clear. We're not trying to say every single sidewalk in the central business district, but to emphasize the key point we're trying to make here is that this is a shopping district that is designed to accommodate pedestrians and cyclists. Okay. The next question was one about a comment I had made, another inartful comment about parking decks in the central business district. I had said that there was one central parking deck for parking. That's not true. There are 3. They're so close together that for the casual visitor, an outsider like me, it can often seem like one parking area. They're clustered there at the center. I wasn't trying to make a statement about how many parking spaces there are, or actually even how many facilities, but just that all off-street parking is clustered in this one location. I'll edit that language to make it clearer that there are 3 separate decks. Okay, next is the comment that you were making, Justin, about the report asserting that State Road Route 206 North, quote, may only be reached by car. Yeah, that needs an edit. Of course, it's being reached by buses as well, and some shoppers, some visitors will come by bus. I'll make a change to that language to make it clear that the point I was trying to make with this was to say that it is only convenient to reach that particular shopping district. And the same is also true, as pointed out by someone else in a comment about the Bund Street area. It's only convenient to do so by motor vehicle. Some people will walk there, will walk through there because it's adjacent to where they live, but it is not designed to receive outside visitors on foot. And once you are there on either state road or in any of the establishments on Bond Drive, you're not going to walk from one commercial location to another. There are no sidewalks. All right, there are no accommodations for cyclists to be separated from the highway traffic, or even places for them to park their bicycles. So this stands in stark contrast to the pedestrian-oriented district that is the central business district. And that's really the point we're trying to make. Commerce functions differently when the infrastructure is set up to receive motor vehicles and pedestrians. That's the point we're trying to make there, and I'll make sure the language is clearer to reflect your comments. Okay. Next, there was a question about that was Bund Drive may only be reached by car.
Actually, Mark, David, can I interrupt? David.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This actually goes back 1 or 2 questions, but I just want to caution you, Mark. You're talking about the sidewalks being wide where they're needed in the central business district. I agree with that, but you sort of lumped pedestrians and bicyclists together in saying that they're both being well served in the central business district. The fact is, bicyclists are not allowed to ride on the sidewalk, and rightfully so, because the sidewalks are so crowded with pedestrians. And we don't have any accommodation for cyclists in the central business district anywhere.
We have bike racks, though.
We have bike racks, but we do not have bike lanes. We don't have.
Well, yeah, I don't mean to say that it couldn't improve. It certainly could. The point is, though, there are actually things that you can do there that would be extremely difficult to try to do along Route 206.
Mark, I think that's part of the ongoing evolution of the mobility recommendations for the plan, and I don't think we shouldn't dismiss anything out of hand because it may be hard to do. Princeton does a lot of things that are hard to do, so I think that's the point. Am I correct, David?
Well, that's fine.
I would even say, along 206 has a nice wide shoulder, and Bottle King may even have a bike rack. I mean, a bike rack does not make for bike friendly. So I think the point that I'm trying to make is that we do need work, and the survey responses too, Mark. Many more pedestrians feel comfortable traversing Princeton than bicyclists based on the responses to your own survey. So that's the distinction I'm trying to make.
Yeah,
I agree with you, Councilman, and I'll.
Mark, we can help with that language. We can help you with that language.
Trying to imply otherwise. Pardon?
We can help you with that language.
Okay, fine, Mike. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I certainly wasn't meaning to imply otherwise. I was just trying to set out the distinctions between the nature of retail business in one as opposed to the way it works in the other. That's all.
Fair enough.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just jump in on OneDrive again, just to back up a little bit?
Yeah.
I always get worried when wording is such that somebody reading a report for the first time, people tend to find, are there things that could be taken the wrong way or slightly wrong, and then kind of dismiss the entire report. So along the entire length of OneDrive is a very wide sidewalk / also used as a bike path. And we kind of seem to say in here that there's no connection from Princeton Community Village to get you down towards the shopping center. So I'm just worried that it appears we're ignoring something that a lot of people either ride their bikes or walk up and down every day. So it's not a big thing, but I think if you have enough of those things like that in there that are slightly off, it kind of gets to the credibility of the whole report. And I just worry about that when there's the final version. So
that's perfectly valid, Mayor. I agree with you, and I do plan to make these changes, and I hope you'll pardon. Again, I'll call them inartful comments. It was reaching for a different point and tread on the toes of another point, and that's unfortunate. So we'll make those fixes, and thank you for that.
Yeah, no, and Mark, look, I think the whole process here, where we all get a chance to say things and comment, and the fact that we're all here every day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's all very helpful. So this is all good. So we will, as a group, we'll get there. So we're good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. All right, I just have a couple of others. Let's see. The expansion of the undergraduate student body has already begun with the enrollment of the class of 2026 on campus. Now, no plan at this time to expand the undergraduate student body. This was a point that referred to comments that I made about Alexander Street and plans for future development, which I now understand, thanks to that comment, that are not actually plans, they're prospects for future development. So we'll make that edit to make it clear that this is not an actual plan. This is recognition of the prospect. Next, there was a point that was made. I had made the comment that the Fitz-Randolph Gate on Nassau Street is the main entry point into the campus of Princeton University. And the comment was made that, well, you can't really say that there's a main entry point into Princeton University. There are so many points. That one does not even accommodate motor vehicles. There's so many others that do, so many other places where you can come in and enter the campus. And once again, I'll admit, I've said something that, I didn't state something very carefully. What I was trying to say was the Fitz-Randolph Gate is located very carefully, I thought, at a place where Nassau Street and Witherspoon Streets intersect. This is the center of the Central Business District. This is the place where that whole pedestrian audience is interacting, and that grand prominent gateway there to the university happens to stand directly opposite this central point, this intersection that is the key intersection of the Central Business District. And for visitors, not university people, not students, not faculty, not staff, but for outside visitors who are here in Princeton, who are there navigating Nassau and Witherspoon, they see that gate, and I'm sure they perceive that as a main entry point, and that's what I was trying to say. Go ahead, Kristen.
So thanks, Mark. So perhaps the word ceremonial entry point isn't more appropriate than a main entry point.
All right.
I think you just have to be careful about calling that. I understand what you were explaining there, but calling that area the main part of Princeton University's campus, and we own hundreds of acres. So, that's a ceremonial front campus. The most active parts of our campus where people live and work aren't right there. So I just want to be careful about implying it's something more than it's a ceremonial historic entrance.
That's fine.
and it's at that point of inflection with the community. So I think it just needs some rewording.
I'll be glad to use your word. It is a ceremonial gate. I'd just like, for the purposes of the coincidental, that gate, that entry point to the university happens to coincide with precisely the heart of the central business district. A useful point, I think. But in any event, yes, I'll be glad to make that
Yeah,
change.
I mean, I think it is useful, and I'm certainly not arguing with Kristen's suggested wording, but it is a prominent gateway, you know, for as far as the community is concerned and alumni and whatnot. So I completely agree. It's not the primary entrance, but you know, ceremonial and gateway and stuff, those things certainly apply. Not to get deep into wordsmithing, but
Right.
I just think in this context, Louise, when the other parts of the master plan encourage the university to use Faculty Road as the distributor for university traffic. So I'm thinking of it in the context of what the master plan says about university circulation. So that's a little bit of the background that I was using.
Mhm. Okay, well, thanks very much. I'm gonna, I think there's one other. Oh, yes, there was the point made about my reference to the Wawa as, quote, the most popular retail destination for university students. And then the further point that there is no current plan to add additional retail in that area, you know, Alexander Street. And I simply wanted to say that my comment in the report was paraphrasing of the perceptions of a few stakeholders. In stakeholder interviews, stakeholders commented that they thought that students were using the Wawa rather than going to stores in downtown Princeton. That makes it a perception, not a fast data point that you can use. However, we can also point to some data in the student survey when we saw, in response to questions about what are students' shopping habits, and the students of Princeton University and the Theological Seminary responded that 10% of them never, ever dine on Nassau Street, never dine in downtown. 25% of them say that stores in downtown Princeton are too expensive. So while that's not a direct reference to the Wawa, it was certainly something that tended to support the perception of some of the stakeholders that students go to the Wawa, they don't go down. So that's all that point meant to say. Okay.
So I just think you have to, I'm sorry, because I made this comment. You might not want to call it the most popular, you can call it a popular, it's a popular retail establishment for students. But I would hesitate in talking about pulling away from the business district. Let's be honest, Wawa is open when everything else is closed.
Yes.
At times of day when all of us are asleep and our students are finally awake and actually still want something to eat. So I'm not going to belabor the point, but the Wawa is very distinctive because it's open when everyone else is closed. It's close to where they all live. It's cheap.
Yeah.
So it's popular. And I'll stop there.
Chris, was your point about, I'm sorry, was your point about the increase in students in the student class size addressed?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe so. I think Mark said at the onset you were going to rework that section about the student increase on the Alexander Road.
Yes,
references. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
Thanks, Mia.
Yeah. Okay. So that was all the questions that I had prepared responses for. Justin, was there anything else that we missed?
I don't think so. I'll double check while Christine and then Tim and then Councilman Cohen ask or add whatever they would like.
Joe and Mark, in your definition of the central business district, you include Witherspoon Street. Does that include portions of Witherspoon Street that extend past the cemetery towards the municipal building? Are you considering that in your economic analysis?
I can tell you that I certainly, sorry, you're indicating something, Joe? Oh, yeah, I think you're
No,
muted.
I'm opening, I thought we had described it somewhere, but I have to look it up. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, it was certainly part of my analysis, doing the, walking analysis of the district. I went up there. Now, technically, do you include it within the central business district, since there's a gap in commerce from the lower end of Witherspoon to the upper end? There's a gap, but I wouldn't consider that a separate district. So yes, generally speaking, we lumped it in, and frankly, would encourage efforts to try to expand, to try to better connect the two, try to encourage people to walk or bike, or
And I would suggest
communicate
adding
the
that
entire
to
length.
I think that's important then, to add that to the report, so it's clear that, there is a recognition that there is
It's the gap.
it is a common thing that is brought up by members of that neighborhood and others, that there is a perception that the commerce and the economic development and vitality we want to see ends at the Arts Council, and
Yeah.
the rest of Witherspoon gets ignored.
Okay,
Let me
that's a fair
pile on.
point. Go ahead.
Let me pile on for a moment if I can. What we did in the surveys particularly, there's a phrase in the consumer survey, Christine, that says, now we'd like to learn more about how you use the central business district of Princeton. For the purposes of this survey, quote, the central business district refers to the stores, restaurants, and businesses in the area around Nassau Street and Palmer Square near Princeton University. And there was a lot of debate about that while we were writing the questions. And that was finally the consensus question that everybody, you don't want to get so particular that they think, well, that store, but not the one next to it, kind of thing. And that was the question that everybody seemed to feel adequately described it.
All right, and now Tim. You're on mute, Tim.
Sorry about that. And I'm sorry I didn't include this in my comments in the email that went around, but I think that we might need some clarification. On page 7, the second to the last paragraph from the bottom, there's a sentence that said, we heard from a number of stakeholders, including some council members, about their perceptions that Princeton zoning regulations are responsible for some missed business opportunities in both the CBD and the Princeton Shopping Center. It is a pretty important sentence, especially in a master plan where zoning changes are inevitable. And I'm just wondering if that could be fleshed out a little bit with, was it specific zoning regulations or the zoning as a whole that led to that? I mean, I don't see where it's addressed elsewhere in the report. And again, it's clear that it's clear in the sentence that it's perceptions, but if there's more information, I'd like to see us include that.
Michael Sullivan, can I turn to you first on that to see, do you think that is the type of thing that would be included in this economic summary or fleshed out throughout the master plan?
Well, I think it can be fleshed out when you actually get to the economic development, plan element. I think that's more likely scenario.
But thanks, and that's a reminder too that this report is an appendix to the master plan, and there will be an economic development element utilizing some of the things that we'll see in those other community surveys and the forthcoming ones.
All right, so again, if the report is to inform the element, then it might be helpful to whoever winds up on that committee to know if there were specific concerns and what they were, as opposed to a general statement that the zoning is getting in the way of. Anyway,
Yeah.
I know I've been heard. It's okay to say that.
It's a fair question, Tim, and I can tell you that while it may not be expressed on page 7, there are other points in our report, JGSC's report, where we talk about some of the specific concerns that were raised by stakeholders with regard to zoning. They had to do with specific uses that have not been allowed, or uses that were not allowed at ground floor, were only allowed at upper levels. So, a gymnasia, for example, it was a stakeholder's perception that, and we didn't check up on this to see, does the zoning actually do what the stakeholder said? But there was a perception there that, you can't have a gym on a ground floor, and therefore, if you want to have one, nobody's going to be able to see that you have it. So you can't have. Other uses that were denied, one had to do with a reference to a wet lab that the town lost the business. There was a business that wanted to locate in the central business district, but it could not locate here because zoning prohibited a wet lab. It wound up going just outside of town. In Plainsboro, I think. Anyway, it says in the report. So there were a few examples of that.
Mark, what is a wet lab?
It was a research facility, a business that's partnered with Princeton University, wanted to do some research, scientific research with, I'm not sure beyond that, what wet lab actually means, but that was the term the stakeholder used.
Mm-hmm. Is that the type of business that would be supportive of economic activity in a central business district?
Well, it certainly adds people who are working in the district who would then patronize the other stores and dining facilities. So
okay.
And I see Councilman Cohen with his hand up.
Yeah, I just, this isn't what I raised my hand for, but want to comment on the question of wet labs. I think there's an issue in our office research zone where there's like undersized sewer sanitary facilities, and that there are restrictions on wet labs up Bund Drive. It's I think that might be what the person was referring to. So I'm just throwing that out there. And then what I did raise my hand to talk about is that I had sent an email with a general comment that, this report seems to be really strongly focused on retail. And yet what we're seeing in the report is that, retail is about 10 or 15% of the total businesses in Princeton. And I just want to throw out there the question, with our other businesses, what, if we're creating an economic development element for the master plan, it seems like we should be creating one that deals with all aspects of business that are transacted in Princeton. And I don't know if you have any recommendations or input from your research that you've done that would suggest how we support, for instance, the service sector, which is much larger than the retail sector. So there
are, if you permit me, Mark, the reason that there's a focus on retail is because nationally it accounts for 75% of gross domestic, or sorry, 70% of gross domestic product. So it's really the driving force. And I think we had gone through a question, might have been Sam who raised, somebody had raised it, and I can't remember, the question of retail versus services. Services as defined by the Census Bureau is so broad-based that it becomes difficult to measure what value some of them contribute. So as I had said earlier, a car wash, for an example, or an auto repair, or painting, a car painting place is considered a service, not a retail store. Clearly, they contribute to the gross domestic product because they have those sales. The only thing we really know in the case of a wet lab the investment bankers, of which there are a number on Nassau Street. The only thing that we really know about that is that on average, the employee contributes about $6,100 a year to the local economy, but there is no contribution from an investment banker to the local retail economy. So that, I mean, it seems like the focus is heavy on retail because candidly, that's where the dollars are generated, and those sort of things. But to your point, happy to go back. We'll look at it, see if there is some place we can make more of a distinction on it. But just keep in mind that when you talk about services, you're talking about libraries, you're talking about Princeton University probably is classified as a service. So that's why you focus on retail, because that's what is measurable and that's what is going to generate the sales and the economic activity.
Okay.
And
I
would
think it would
only
be
add-
helpful. Yeah, it would be helpful to put that in somewhere. Just sort of say this report focuses on retail because it's, it really is the economic engine, even though, other businesses have, are important or whatever.
I think that's fine, Councilman. We'll do that. I do want to point out that among our conclusions is a conclusion that the town could benefit by doing even more with the university to try to partner on more business opportunities and not referring strictly to retail. Yes, the partnership would make sure that you would avoid creating competitive situations that might hurt retailers that you have in the central business district and in the shopping center. But more importantly, there are many businesses that the university attracts who would like to locate in the town. And apparently that can be difficult. And we do speak to that in our report and suggest that there are some things that the town might want to consider in terms of trying to facilitate the entry of those partnering businesses. So.
And I'll just make one more comment about this because I had my ear bent by one particular constituent. Justin also heard from him, who was interested in sort of incubators, not just for for tech industry, basically as something that can come out of the engineering schools at the university. And, we had our service area, our S2 district that is down, the hill on 206, has a little bit of a little tiny tech incubator. And he was making the argument that that was something that we really need to continue to provide for and perhaps encourage in our zoning. And I don't know if it's realistic at all in terms of what the modern needs of tech businesses are in terms of shop space and things like that. Maybe real estate is too expensive in Princeton to actually be trying to foster that kind of use. But I'm just putting it out there as something. It's almost as much for the other members of the steering committee to make them aware that this is a conversation as something that maybe you should be incorporating into your report.
To your comment, David, we have worked in incubator situations. The one that comes to mind is Biobat in Brooklyn at the Brooklyn Army Terminal. And I agree with you that low rent and low cost facilities, it really plays a key role there. I don't recall a lot of them being in the higher priced real estate. There is one in Manhattan that I'm aware of, but most of them tend to be in Queens and in Brooklyn and in the lower rent kind of areas. So.
And I see Sam has patiently been waiting.
Yeah, Justin, I don't know if this is a question for the consultants or you, but I'm curious if you could comment on what is the overall purpose of the economic development element of the master plan? And does this report have the appropriate amount of actionable suggestions to make to realize the goals of the economic development element?
Yeah, I could start to tackle that, and then I think Clark and Hintz might want to jump in. But first off, we obviously have never had an economic development element thus far. So this is something new to us that we're basically creating from scratch here. And the point is kind of like Joe said earlier, but we constantly hear about how do we retain businesses in town, but also how do we make sure that it's not just food, women's clothes, or if it is women's clothes, is Amazon gonna then put those out of business, or higher end clothes or whatever else. So really having kind of first the fact-based part, which we're seeking to get from this analysis, and then the community input part of the remainder of the element, and that's still being processed. I know all those questions at the open house, for example, about what we want to see downtown, whether it's a small grocery store, an incubator, or anything else that we said there, that all feeds into it too, to say that, here's what people are saying, here's what the facts are saying, and here are the things that are preventing that from happening. That's kind of what we're looking to get out of this element, and then let that also feed into the others, including like land use. Right now I think our ordinances are silent on a tattoo parlor, for example. I don't think anything technically prohibits it, but obviously nothing is in the affirmative about that. So an applicant or someone thinking about doing that might say, you know what, I'm not even going to go through the ringer, spend X $1,000, and then find out I can't do it. This element will help to, have some of those things bubble to the surface, and then allow for the planning board and then council to act upon that. Michael, is there anything you want to add into there?
I don't want to extend this conversation too long, but I agree with you. This is informing about goals, assumptions, goals, objectives, and policies relevant to economic development. Those policies, assumptions will feed into not just this element, but it really feeds into the mechanisms of the master plan and ultimately the zoning ordinance. Zoning, we just had, David described the fact that the wet lab had an infrastructure issue potentially. Well, this could say, well, listen, maybe upgrade your infrastructure. So that could feed into a utility plan element. That's an example. The mobility information that was gleaned from this, it's not as in depth as what we saw from the survey of the community vision survey or the open house, but it dovetails with that. So it also could feed into that. So it's land use, zoning, and other elements. So it's looking at it broadly, and and the statistics and the in there is informative because it gives you more of a basis to think about the future growth and how extensive some of those might be in terms of land use changes or zoning changes.
Does that answer the question, Sam?
I mean, I guess it does. I guess, whenever I'm thinking about, whenever you frame it as an economic development element, I assume that the goal of that element might be to, for example, maximize the non-residential ratables for the municipality. And then to that extent, when I'm reading this report, I find it really reads more like an element intended to advance the profitability of consumer retail in the central business district, i.e., a sector which maybe makes up less than 20% of the total economy of Princeton. And I have to agree with the councilman that I was just struck by the really huge focus on that specific sector of the economy. However, in hearing your response, it seems that actually that is indeed the intention of this economic development element. It is in fact to maximize the vitality of retailers in the central business district. And therefore, questions like what I had, which was, for example, are all of the sites on Bunn Drive fully occupied and utilized to the maximum possible use? probably becomes a lower priority than, for example, the exact blend of stores which is present in Commerce Square.
I think that just to follow up, I think I would not make the assumption that every town that does a study like this is intent on maximizing the market. They may be looking at this and saying, here's the potential and here's what we want. Here's what we're willing to accept within the framework of our central business district, because we have other uses that need to be accommodated and other concerns relative to density, relative to the need for housing. And so it can be used as a starting point, and that can be taken by the deciders in different directions.
And just before we wrap this up, there's one other comment that wasn't addressed, and it was about a vacant lot by the Bottle King. I don't think that changes the point that Mark was trying to make by that area, but we'll work together to get that figured out.
We are going to make that amendment, Justin.
Good.
Yeah, thank you.
Justin, before you change the topic, could I just chime in?
Sure.
My understanding, and I was as one of the first people in the community who was advocating for the addition of an economic development element to the master plan, was that it would focus as well on what Sam mentioned, which was how to increase our ratables, which obviously is for a town that is, I'm not going to say dominated by nonprofits, heavily populated by nonprofits. We, and our ratables, increasing our ratables is certainly a priority for the current council. So I'm just wondering, that question was left. Michael, were you saying that, yes, it was, the economic development was just designed to enhance the commercial viability of the retail sector in the CBD? Because if so, I think that's probably too narrow than what we need from a working document.
I wasn't suggesting that it was just limited to the CBD. What I was suggesting was that with this study, your priority is increased ratables. So that's what this will be used for, to identify how that can do that. In other places, it may be more of a balanced approach to increasing ratables. That's all I was saying.
Okay, but I think Sam's point is that the material that we need to make decisions about how best to increase ratables is not perhaps as robust in this report as what we might need. Was that your point, Sam?
I don't know. I mean, a genuine question. I do not know what the purpose of the economic development element is, and in trying to evaluate the report, and whether we use the word dominated here or there, it's kind of there's a broader question. What is the report supposed to be achieving? And then that's kind of only in understanding the answer to that question do I feel like I can actually make an honest appraisal of the report.
Well, I think I'm just going to say that I do hope that either through the interplay between this report and the recommendations for the actual element, there will be more information in the form of recommendations made, because I think there's not enough for decision makers in what we have here to be able to chart a course to enhance our ratables.
Yep.
Thanks.
So I'll just jump in here to say, in general, yes, absolutely. We will be looking at other things in addition to this. Things like how to bring more jobs in, how to make what the zoning, for example, allows you to do or maybe not do. All those things that aren't necessarily identified by a survey that talks about consumer spending, we can look at through other mechanisms. And so, yes, we'll do that.
Great. Good to know.
All right, then I think we close up this conversation. Michael, do you want to lead us to the next one?
Yeah, so the next,
Signify to Joe and Mark.
yes, Joe and Mark, you do not have to hang around. You're welcome to skip out. But thank you very much for your responses and your discussion. The next part of the agenda deals with the vision survey results, the report, and the open house reports. And I know Susan Blickstein has a finite time period here to help out. So we had provided that. We had gotten a couple of comments back. The one comment was calculate the dots on the dot map that we had, and we had done that. And there was a comment about the resolution of the images within the document. So we're going to address that. And I can't, Justin, can you remind me of any other outstanding questions? I didn't receive any, but if there are questions now, we'll answer any of them.
Justin, was that distributed to us or was that just reviewed by staff so far? Because I don't remember seeing it.
Yeah, I sent the visioning survey report and the open house report a few weeks prior. We were just waiting on the economic one. I'd be happy to send
an
it
email dated January 10th, I think.
All right, then it sounds like there aren't any questions. Michael, do you want to move on? And, you know, if you didn't get a chance to read it or if there are any things that you need clarified, feel free to always email me as well. Otherwise, I thought it was a very well done by the Blickstein group and Clark Anans. And Michael, do you want to go into the next then about working with staff on technical questions and then, you know, the master plan subcommittees?
So we skated over the open house. Are we saying that both those reports are fine?
Yeah.
Okay.
I lumped them together just because we were an hour and a half in. So that's what I
Just
did.
double checking.
So we had coordinated with Justin and folks to plot a course. Now that we've gotten through these initial the public engagement pieces, and we are summarizing them with the economic survey, the open house, and the community vision survey. What we want to do and what we propose to do is that we want to bring this information along with the existing data that we've been collating and collecting and trying to format to get into a format where we can use it. And that includes previous documents, which you have a summary. We provided a summary back in the end of August, September of all the existing documents. Those include the existing master plan elements and reexamination reports, as well as studies that have been adopted, et cetera. But we're putting together, we intend to meet with specific municipal, we call them municipal resources. And these would be like technical folks like the engineering department, the planning and zoning office. We also have in our plan to meet with the Board of Education Long Range Planning Committee to hear from them. And these meetings would be used as a way to bring the information we have to date, the survey information, the reports, as well as these existing documents to the technical staff and find out what their recommendations are based on where they are currently in their worlds. We don't know what their worlds are, but we need to know, and how these are going to feed into the various elements. So it will be geared to each of the different elements that we're talking about. For instance, engineering would be involved in stormwater management, utilities, mobility, whatever they want to talk to us about, their priorities about. But the purpose of these meetings would be so that we can engage these folks and develop a series of recommendations, at least preliminarily, that can be then used, as Justin talked about, with subcommittees of the steering committee to develop these elements as draft elements that can be vetted by the entirety of the steering committee. Kristen has a hand up.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Michael. So these sound like really important conversations. Will they be, will minutes be taken and made available
We can certainly do that. It's my intent, I mean, ideally that we would do these as in-person meetings. And so we could take minutes and because what we're going to be doing is generating, recommendations for this for the various subcommittees to react to and to incorporate into their thinking. So yes, minutes. Yes.
Well, one thing we had discussed was reports coming from Clark and Hintz to the subcommittees that we'll speak about after. So I think, at the risk of allowing people to speak freely, we'd probably be better served using that than minutes. It's just my opinion.
Not recording what's said?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm a staff member, as I am going to be interviewed here, and I say, this zoning is problematic because of X, I don't feel I could say that, in the same way.
So, okay, as someone who I think is, based on the next few things, going to be asked to sit on a subcommittee, I'm confused as to how that information will be shared up if it's not recorded in some way. I understand non-identifying, Justin, but I don't know how that will be shared up to others that need to do work.
It'll be recorded in a report. I guess maybe I'm confusing the issue rather than a transcript or minutes. But if the request here is to have minutes.
And minutes can be, they don't have to be, Justin said X, Kristen said Y. And I can understand the chilling effect that can take for some folks. And we want to get candid feedback. I think it's just important to get the candid feedback and then to make sure that that candid feedback doesn't die at that session, that it gets shared. So whatever mechanism you all can think of that allows that to happen. So I think you're going to get some really good feedback from the people who do this on a day-to-day basis, who understand, what businesses have they heard from that couldn't locate in Princeton? What challenges are they hearing from residents, et cetera, et cetera.
Would a summary of comments, concerns, and recommendations do the trick? I mean,
I can explain how we plan to do this. I mean, we are going to be, this is like an interview workshop session. These are going to be like mini workshops where we come in and we're going to write down what the recommendation, what if they have assumptions about things, or they have problems, or if there are suggestions, we're going to be writing them down. We're going to be marking up maps and things like that. And we don't intend, we're not going to make any judgments about what this input is at the time. That's going to be done through the subcommittees who are going to be vetting this and telling us what we've heard. This, we want to go in this direction, and that's how we envision it. And so that's the way we plan to do it. I don't know if you need more than that or you want less than that. But
I didn't need to know who said what. I feel like we need to understand what's being elevated through these conversations.
And in the way we envision this, there's no question that you will know that.
If I can just, chime in as somebody who's actually been involved with writing two elements of the current master plan, but both the green building environmental sustainability and the current version of the circulation element. Especially in the time frame that we're working in, what I'm sort of hoping is that out of this staff input and and the information that Clark Caton has already gotten from BCCs, and there's been a lot of inputs. I hope that what the subcommittees are going to be asked to do is to start reviewing draft elements, actually, of the proposed master plan. And those draft elements should have decision points flagged in them. So for instance, there might be a lot of stuff that's uncontested, that everybody sort of agrees this is what should be happening. And then there should be areas where you can report, we've heard 3 different approaches to addressing this issue. And that's going to give the subcommittees what they need to be able to efficiently give the decision-making that you're looking for. That's what I've been hoping the process was going to be. So you can reflect on whether you think that's good or not.
I think that's fine. I think that's reasonable, but it's your call. How you want it to be done.
And Council President Sachs, do you want to comment? And then I guess Michael, since we're kind of segueing into how those subcommittees are going to be done, do you want to then just go into that? And
sure,
I think that'll address a lot of that.
I did have one question, and it was, and you can get to it after I finish, which was basically what the difference is between the intake sessions that you've been conducting, Justin, with the different groups, because it seems like now there's going to be a second pass with CCH, or is there something different there?
Are you talking about with the staff groups or with the subcommittees?
Not the subcommittees. You just referenced that CCH would be meeting with different groups, with staff, with the long range facilities group of the school board, of I guess a number of different groups, and it sounded like it included some of the BCCs, or and you've already conducted quite a few of those meetings. So I was just wondering, is this sort of building on the meetings that you had, the intake meetings that you had with those groups, or it's separate, or is?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Those meetings have been mostly both to get people involved in some of the things we've done, but also to receive memos from the board or the commission. And those will then be shared to the commission or the subcommittee members as how we envision this.
Okay.
So it's not like we're going back to the Affordable Housing Board and saying, hey, tell us everything. But we might, speak with the new Affordable Housing Manager, on that kind of end this time around.
I was just asking because it goes to Kristen's point that there have already been some intake sessions that have occurred. And I guess depending on the BCC or the context, there may or may not have been minutes or recordings. And I'm not sure if you took notes or not, Justin, but I do think it's, there is a question about the information flow and the process, which I'm thinking we may be getting to, but there also appears to me to be a leap between a big actual chasm between this intake, the various intakes that we're discussing, and the actual drafting. And David, I'm not sure if you meant the circulation element or the bike mobility plan, but I also was involved with the green building and sustainability element and the bike mobility plan. And, for example, I would say that the green building and sustainability element, even though it took us many, many years to finish for just one element, so I'm not sure that that's a model we want to replicate. We at least knew that Louise was in charge, and she was we knew who was, we knew where different drafts came from. We knew, for example, that there were some material that was written by David, some other material that was written by Zenon. Louise was very good about flagging where the discrepancies were between of opinion. And as subsequent drafts evolved, we knew exactly where the information that came into the draft came from, and how it was evolving. And I think that provided a comfort level. To Kristen's point, by contrast with the bike mobility plan, there was tremendous frustration among the stakeholders, which was the bike committee and the bike advocacy committee, because it disappeared into the office of Lee Solo and appeared again months later in a drastically different form, and no one had any idea who or how or why it appeared in that different form. So that would definitely be a model we don't want to replicate this time. So I guess my point is just, I myself am unclear. It's about what's going to happen in between the intake sessions and then the act. And now, David, you're sort of jumping ahead to saying that you would like for the committees to see drafts. And I think that could really cause could cause some alarm, because we have no then accountability for where the information, where it came from, who put it in the draft, who the
Well, as
draft.
Justin just said, that the subcommittees would see the memos that have been received from the various BCCs. And I can only speak to the BCCs that I'm involved with, but both flood and stormwater and the Ped and Bike Advisory Committee and Vision Zero Task Force all prepared written memos to suggest what they would like to see going into. And I don't know what Justin's, you're calling them intake sessions, but Justin's intake sessions with those committees consisted of attending a meeting and saying, here's what we're doing and we'd like you to do a memo for us. So I'm hoping that all of the BCCs that are giving input into the master plan are preparing memos similar to what my BCCs have done, and that the subcommittees will see all that information.
So
Yep.
maybe the answer to Kristen's question really, or maybe the solution there is that the meetings that CCH has with these other entities, that one potential result would be a memo from the entity that outlines what their recommendations are that they can verbally elaborate on in the meeting, but at least then there's some clarity for the steering committee of where the origin of the recommendations. I'm not sure what the right answer is here. But I do know that there are a lot of questions about process, and so I'll leave it at that.
Michael, can you then address that process, and then we'll take these questions head on at the end.
Right, and so the way that we envisioned this process was these technical meetings, from municipal resources, that we would develop information with them and then bring those to each of the subcommittees, and the steering committee is welcome to have those memos holistically or not. I mean, that can be part of the package, and then develop with the steering committees based on that information and other information, the draft elements. That's the plan. That's the way I envisioned it.
Yeah.
And that those draft plan elements would be then vetted by the entirety of the steering committee.
So
That's the layers that we had envisioned, that we discussed with Justin.
can I hop in just for a second? I'm sorry, David. So based on what I'm seeing here about next steps, I guess I'm focusing on next steps. So those technical meetings, it says that they'll happen in January and February.
Yeah.
Which will then be inputs to the subcommittees. So those subcommittees wouldn't then start work until March, because they have to get those reports and then start their work. So that's March, April, at least at a minimum.
Right.
And then there's this visioning survey and open house. So it seems like that's going to have to get pushed to May, June. Because they have to follow sequentially as they're listed here.
But potentially, there may be, as we're in the steering committees. So as we may come out of a steering committee meeting, and there may be some issues that need to be further vetted through a survey or an open house. We don't know what those issues may be. The second open house and survey were really refinements on information that where we wanted to explore and take a deeper dive on specific issues, even more than before. So if let's say that there's an issue, we had kicked around, if there's a specific site in town that's got a lot of opinions about it, maybe that's something that you do the survey about, or there's a specific area where there's a indecision, or there's a difference of opinions about how to go forward with a particular land use improvement. That's the way we thought about that. So we've got the second open house and survey in there. It's not clear to us right now what those questions are, and it may not be clear until we get into the process of developing these elements. But to your point, Kristen, yes, that's probably where we're going to end up in timing wise.
Right. And just a key part, but you're listing the four subcommittees here for elements. One of the key parts of this process is goals and priorities and what's the chicken and the egg here? So how can you be writing a land use element if you don't yet have the priorities and goals? Or does, I'm just trying, and I'm trying to figure out where that, who is working on that? Where is that part of the document coming from?
That part is coming from it's already started with the surveys that we've gotten, right? So we're already seeing what the assumptions are that the draft assumptions are that we're starting to articulate. And we would be working, when we work with the subcommittees, those would be components of those elements. We would have agreement on or hope to get agreement on the draft assumptions, goals, policies, and objectives as those elements. That's what composes those elements. And although the master plan itself can have a separate section that deals with those, the goals, assumptions, policies, they're actually developed individually, and then they can be reflected holistically in the frontispiece to the master plan. So that's part of the element development.
And the group that I'm looking at in the boxes here is the group that's going to be drafting all of this.
Well, in our world, what we were envisioning was that these would be coming up through the individual subcommittees, not the steering committee.
The subcommittees, right? But so who else is going to be on these subcommittees?
So the
Other
subcommittee,
than the people that I'm looking at in the boxes.
yes, they're members of
That's
the.
not quite so askance, Kristen.
Right, I mean, basically, so this group here is going to be tasked with writing these 4 elements.
Not writing them, that's what Clark Kane Hints is here to do. I know in the past, some of those examples that were made or that were used, that was when we didn't have any consultant helping. So it was either the planner or planning board members. And obviously that's not what we're doing. Clark Kane Hints with their experience is, doing the nitty gritty. And then the subcommittees will be made up of members of this committee. We're not bringing in anyone new. We're not adding our 26 BCCs in any way or anything like that. Part of the reason we're doing this is because we're adapting to hearing that we don't, members of this committee don't really know why they're here, or they don't know, they aren't going to be able to say anything about, say, historic preservation, but they might know an awful lot about, utilities or something like that. So that's kind of the way we've, the thinking behind switching to this, as we drill down into a final actionable, elements in the plan itself.
And since I'm sorry, I'll ask one more question.
Sure, no, please.
So, and since this document ultimately is a planning board document, a document that the planning board needs to adopt. I'm looking at Ms. Wilson, Mr. McGowan, Mr. Taylor, Mr. Quinn, Mr. Cohen, Ms. Sachs. Will a representative from the planning board be on each of these subcommittees so that we can ensure that there's, because I think that leadership in those committees is going to be really important.
Yep, absolutely. And we're still figuring out exactly who's going to be on each of them, or even if these 4 are going to be the 4. There was a comment at a planning board meeting recently about, economic development and historic preservation. Maybe we split it up. So that's not 100% done yet. And people might be on 1 or 2. So don't think, you love mobility, but you also love housing. You got to choose which baby to go with. And then to your point, we are paying special attention to making sure we have at least a member of the planning board in each, hopefully a member of the master plan subcommittee of the planning board on each. I need to, I feel I need to get a whiteboard and start drawing out subcommittees and lines and all that. But, we are somewhat doing that.
Not to belabor.
I highly recommend the whiteboard approach.
I've been using Excel.
Very high tech, Louise.
Yes, Council President.
So if you could just one more time, Michael, summarize, because I just thought Kristen's point was really an important one about the chicken and the egg. And I have had this concern for quite some time about the time frame and how logistically the information will be processed. And while to some extent the topic areas that you've articulated in the subcommittees are distinct, you know, the information that's coming in does, including the information that's developed in the subcommittees, does inform the work of the other subcommittees. And it's just the actual, you know, flow is still, it still seems quite vague. So I'm just, Michael, if you could just once again give your best shot at, you know, sort of giving us a sense of how the process would go step by step.
Well, so the municipal resource folks that we want to meet with are not going to be informing just one particular element, right? They may weigh in on several of the elements, but we are going to be bringing them these existing documents and the information that we have from the surveys and the open house. We are going to generate recommendations from that. Those recommendations are going to be shared with the subcommittees, and we can also share that with the steering committee. Based on that, we were going to work with the subcommittees responsible for each of the elements to generate the assumptions, goals, policies, and recommendations for each of the elements. Those drafts would then be brought to the entirety of the steering committee, along with any documentation or information I know that we generate, so that you see what we're coming from. And then
by drafts right now, when you said drafts, you didn't mean draft elements, you meant drafts just in terms of general goals, objectives. You're not talking about the actual draft of the element, or are you?
well, I think it may be that I think it's both. I think that those are compose the elements. I mean, the assumptions, the goals, policy, and objectives, those are the master plan, right? And then there will be specific actions in there as well. So all of that will be in those drafts. That's the intent. And they will be the predicate, if not a draft of an element, a predicate to drafting the elements.
Okay. And again, I'm just, you know, reprising what others have alluded to here, but the actual drafting the language of each element in a town like this. I mean, look at the discussion that this person who was here earlier. I mean, you know, the extent to which we go over language and often you know, are not pleased with how things were written. I just know from the experience that, as you know, and David and Louise can speak to this as well, with elements that, you know, it took us years for one element. And if there is a subcommittee that comes up, even with the drafting of a language, it's hard for me to imagine that even this steering committee would be able to approve it in a short amount of time, let alone the community, such that, or some subset of the public of the community, such that once it gets to planning board, the planning board would feel confident signing off. I just think we all need to be realistic about what's ahead of us here.
Well, from a strategic standpoint, and this is something that we discussed a while ago, you know, part of that is the format, and the format of this is intended to be on a word diet, let's say, effective language that does not create the floral trimmings that you need. It needs to have direct, clear language that's not steeped in other worlds of trying to make things sound a certain way. And I think that if we approach it in that sense, I think that there'll be less opportunities for wordsmithing and having negative reactions to the way somebody might think it's appropriate. That's our strategy. And hopefully, and I understand exactly what you're saying about how folks are going to have consensus on this. At some point, somebody's going to have to say, yeah, this is good. And we're trying to get there. But I think that trying to be economic with how we use our words and be clear and direct, I think, is the way to do it.
And I think part of the reason, for instance, that the green building and environmental sustainability element took so long was that we were trying to reinvent the template for what a master plan element should look like. And we really went in that direction that that Michael was just talking about moving away from a narrative style, which is how most of our 1996 master plan was written, to something that was much more, bullet pointed outline approach with specific action items. And so I'm hoping that all of the elements are going to look something like that. And I understand the model ordinance. What's the other community that you got?
Asbury Park.
Asbury Park, I think is written in that way, and it's going to be a big help. And
with the caveat that, as Justin and others have made clear, the Asbury Park document was steered by a small group of people, and there wasn't a lot of there was not widespread input. So,
right.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. We're just not a community that's known for being economical with our word choices.
And I see Louise's hand is up, and I want to jump in to clarify something after as well.
Why don't you go first, Justin?
Sure. Well, I think because we've never done this before, some of the concerns I'm hearing are, maybe the green building model is like, hey, 5 volunteer planning board members, get this done. Here's a word processor. We have the format already, and we have, really an immense amount of inputs from the survey, open house, the previous documents that Clark Kane Hints is reviewing, and they'll summarize, the additional survey and open house and all these sorts of things. So if if anyone is concerned that this move is going to be 4 or 5 people of this group are suddenly going to be the ones deciding on, mobility and utilities, that's just not the case. And it's really not, those 5 personalities are the ones that are deciding what's in there. It's the technical part that we're discussing, all the community input, all the previously adopted documents are then going to be presented to that group. And we're going to say, look, 80% of people said this. All right, let's move on. That's going to be part of it. Or this is unanimous. That'll go into there. Or 60% of people said they wanted this, but we talked to the sewer engineer and he said that's just not feasible. We're going to have to, do some more nuance about it. It's more along those lines. So I think we might not have accurately described what this kind of change is going to, but I hope that, further clarifies that everything we've done thus far has been for a reason and will continue to be to feed us, filter us to that final product. So Louise.
Following up on some of what other folks have said, I think it would be really helpful to write up, from this point forward, what is the step-by-step process that the steering committee and the consultants are going to follow? What are all the steps involved, and what's the approximate time frame for that work? And where are the opportunities for members of the public to kick the tires? Maybe that comes, in a series of public hearings after this steering committee has finished its work and the master plan committee has accepted it and is passing along to the planning board. Or maybe it's, there's at least 1 or 2 opportunities before then. We haven't talked about ways to enhance the interactivity features of the engagement hub, but I think that could be a really key part of this, overall effort to enable members of the public to have input, before the feeling is that everything's been completely baked. And I understand too that adding certain kinds of features to the engagement hub will mean, additional costs to the municipality. Obviously we need to talk about that internally and figure out what are the best ways to do that. But to go back to the first point I was making, the step-by-step process, I think would be a good thing to put to paper or write up, and understanding that sometimes timeframes can shift, but it would be really good to have everybody have the exact same understanding of what is the step-by-step process from here on out.
Okay.
And Christine?
Yeah, I would even go a bit further than what we said. Not a good thing to have. I'd say it's an absolute need to have that sort of written out, as you can see by all the questions here from Kristen and me and others, that understanding how the information is going to be funneled up to the subcommittees and then how it's going to be incorporated and information to flow back is really, really important. So Michael and Elaine, I think it's really critical that you help sort of picture that so that we all have a clear understanding of what is supposed to happen in these subcommittees and how it's going to translate into an actual finished document that will go to the planning board.
We will, and thank you for, I didn't understand the concern about how information flowed before this, and I really got a good sense of, I think we have a better sense of the fact that whatever comes out of these subcommittees and these other and the technical resource folks, how that's important to the overall product. So I appreciate that, and we will articulate that.
Yeah, I think we can put that together, maybe graphically, pretty clearly.
Yes.
Graphically would be good.
Yep.
And can I just ask, who are the planning board members who are considered members of the master plan? So whatever, we're the master plan steering committee. Who are the master plan subcommittee members of the planning board? Am I looking at all of them?
Raise your hands.
Tim Quinn,
Raise your hand,
David
Mr. Taylor.
Cohen, Alvin McGowan, Zenon Tekzarny, once he's formally been reappointed, assuming that happens. Who am I missing?
Jack.
Or Jack, yeah.
I'm sorry, Jack. I apologize, Jack Taylor.
Okay, thank you. That was never clear, so now it's clear.
I think they are also listed on
It was
the.
a slightly different group last year, 2022. So Zenon will be new to the master plan subcommittee this year.
Louise.
And we are ex officio members of the steering committee.
Right.
Louise or Justin, once that list is finalized for this year, if you want to send it along, it is also listed on the engagement hub, so we need to update that.
Certainly. All right, it's 4 p.m. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think we covered just about everything, or the only other things about the upcoming surveys will be covered through email, and once we get that step-by-step process too. So feel free to reach out to me with any other questions or concerns you might have. With that being said, I think we could wrap this up, and thank you for being here today.
Okay, thank you, folks. Be
Thank
well.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin.
You're welcome.